Buried truth, the Louisiana Death Row Cover-Up. The first line of the paper smelled like fear. Someone had written fast, with a shaking hand, and the pages were creased from being folded and hidden. The words described men being beaten while they were handcuffed. They described days in tiny rooms where no one could see them. They named places inside Angola where guards carried out secret punishments. The paper did not belong to a guard or lawyer. It belonged to a man who had been locked away and had only his pen to fight with. The paper reached the outside by whisper, not by mail. A prisoner passed the pages to another prisoner in the dark. Then that second man hid the pages in a shoe. The shoe finally left the prison on the foot of a visitor. And then the pages were folded into a book that a reporter read in a small room under a lamp. When the pages were read out loud, reporters and advocates listened with the same cold surprise. The details matched things other prisoners had said for years. Injuries that never appeared in official reports, punishments that had no paperwork, names of guards who were never questioned. People who had tried to tell the world before were ignored. Now, those folded pages fell like stones into a lake, making rings that could not be ignored. Angola is a place people called the bloodiest prison, and a place where men spent decades in tiny cells by themselves. One man from Angola, Albert Woodfox, lived alone for more than 40 years. He and two others became famous as the Angola Three. They had been placed in solitary for a very long time. Albert told the world how being alone for that long damages a person's mind and heart. He also wrote, taught, and spoke about what he saw inside the walls. His words and other prisoners' words became part of a larger story, a story of wounds, secrets, and people who tried to speak and were not heard. The New Yorker, +1. The pages that arrived outside did something newspapers could not do alone. They lined up with court papers, with lawyers' complaints, and with reports from rights groups. They echoed the stories of men who said guards had beaten prisoners even when those prisoners were already tied up. They matched reports that at times the prison's healthcare failed badly, letting simple wounds become deadly. They matched lawsuits and long complaints that said people inside Angola were punished in secret and that the state often looked the other way. Department of Justice, +1. At first, officials gave short answers. They said they were investigating. They said the prison had rules. They said the pages were old or misunderstood. But the pages kept piling up. More men, once afraid to speak, began to hand over small notebooks, short notes, and whispered recollections. Some told how they were moved to tiny cells after asking for help. Others told how boys sent there had been left to the rule of older inmates. A few of the names on the pages matched names in lawsuits and federal findings. When the names matched, it stopped sounding like rumor. It started sounding like a pattern. The Guardian, +1.
Then, in the middle of the night on a rainy stretch of road, a call came that made everyone sit up. A man who had been inside Angola had died suddenly. He had been one of the men who had been talking, the same man whose small notebooks had been seen by friends. The death was quiet on paper, listed as natural causes in a form, but the notebooks told a different kind of story. They had talk of broken ribs, of nights of being forced to stand for hours, of threats after someone tried to tell a lawyer. The voices on the page seemed to be warning the world that something worse than silence had been hiding in plain sight. People outside the prison demanded answers. Reporters asked for the notebooks. Lawyers asked for files. Families asked for the truth. But the state and prison officials moved slowly. Pages went missing. Paper trails ended in closed rooms. And one question hissed through conversations like a cold wind. If a man who was writing the truth about what had happened to him could die in a prison that claimed to keep people safe, then who would protect the notebooks that proved it? Department of Justice, +1. The morning after the news of his death, the air around Angola felt heavy, like the walls themselves were holding their breath. The man who had been writing the truth was gone, and no one could say how. Some guards whispered that it was his heart. Others said it was the stress. But the inmates who had read his notes before they disappeared said something else. They got to him. In the dorms, men spoke in low voices, afraid the cameras might pick up their words. They remembered how he had warned them that truth doesn't walk out of Angola, it crawls, bleeding. The notebooks he had filled with tiny handwriting were suddenly missing from his cell. When the new warden came through for inspection, everything looked clean. Too clean. His sheets were changed, his locker was empty, not even a pen remained. A few weeks later, one of the inmates who had helped him hide the pages was transferred to another unit. He told a lawyer during visitation that he feared for his life. "They're asking who touched the papers," he said. "They want to know where they went." That conversation reached a local journalist, and within days, the same reporter who had first seen the pages got a call from an anonymous number. "If you want proof, look in the box under the church floor."
The reporter drove down to St. Francisville, where the prison chapel had been rebuilt after a storm. Under a loose board, she found a small metal box wrapped in an old cloth. Inside were copies, photocopied pages of the man's diary. The handwriting matched. The final entry read, "If they find me gone, tell them to read this. They can't bury all of us." When those words were printed in the newspaper, Louisiana's Department of Corrections scrambled for answers. The warden said it was old material, claiming it came from an inmate with mental health issues. But that defense didn't last long. Within days, lawyers and rights groups matched the diary's dates to real incident reports and to hospital records. The diary spoke of a prisoner beaten in the shower on June 12th, and the record showed an inmate admitted that same night with multiple fractures. Another entry described men punished for talking to reporters, something another lawsuit had already claimed years earlier. Soon, what began as one man's words turned into a storm. The Justice Department reopened an investigation into prison abuse at Angola. Reporters started to camp outside the gates. The prison, once hidden behind the swamps, was now under the nation's microscope. Inside, though, things grew darker. Guards began random searches at midnight, tearing through cells, throwing letters and drawings into trash bins. Inmates whispered that one man had been dragged out of his bunk and never came back. Others were told that if they talked to anyone outside, their visits would be cut off. The fear was heavy, but the truth had already slipped beyond the fences. Copies of the diary were being shared online, quoted in newspapers, and read in courtrooms. Albert Woodfox, the man who had spent decades in solitary, spoke publicly about it. He said, "We've been saying this for years. The system buries its mistakes, and sometimes it buries its people." His words echoed across news outlets, bringing back memories of when he and the other Angola 3 had fought the same battle: exposure, retaliation, and survival. One evening, the same journalist who had found the box received another message, this time handwritten and unsigned. "There are more notebooks, but they'll kill for them." The handwriting was new, not the dead man's. It meant someone else inside was still writing, still documenting, still risking everything. But it also meant that whatever had started with those first pages wasn't over. Someone else was ready to carry it on, even if it cost them their life. The reporter sat in her car outside the prison gate, watching the guards switch shifts. The floodlights burned white against the darkness. She knew that somewhere beyond that fence, another story was being written, one line at a time, under the hum of fluorescent lights and the sound of footsteps in concrete halls. She took a deep breath and whispered, "All right, let's find the rest." If one man's diary could shake the walls of a place built to keep secrets, what would happen when the rest of the notebooks came out? The truth was only halfway uncovered, and the next part would test how far those in power were willing to go to keep it buried. The first notebook had shaken Louisiana. The second one nearly broke it.
2 months after the reporter received that last anonymous message, another envelope arrived, unmarked, post-stamped from Baton Rouge. Inside were photocopies of pages written in the same narrow, careful handwriting. These new pages went deeper. They named officers, dates, and places inside Angola where unofficial discipline was carried out. The diary spoke of a narrow hallway behind cell block F, a place the inmates called the tunnel. The tunnel, according to the pages, was where men were taken when the guards wanted silence. They call it cleaning, one line read, but it's blood they washed from the floor. The reporter turned the pages slowly, her hands shaking. Every word painted a picture of the things no one was supposed to see. Beatings after lights out, food trays used as weapons, prisoners left naked in freezing rooms for days. The diary even named a captain who had been promoted after one of those tunnel nights. This time, it was impossible for officials to say the notes were fiction. Too many details matched official logs, medical reports, and internal memos that lawyers had already collected in the lawsuit Lewis versus Kane, which exposed the same patterns of neglect and violence. The walls around Angola and the silence that once protected it began to crumble. When the story hit national news, people across the country were shocked. TV stations showed pictures of Angola's massive fields, where prisoners in striped uniforms worked under the sun with armed guards on horseback. For the first time, millions of Americans heard about the prison's long history, built on the land of a former slave plantation, still echoing with the same cruelty. Lawmakers called for answers. The Department of Corrections promised a full review. But inside Angola, that review looked like more lockdowns, more searches, and more punishment. The men who had helped smuggle the notebooks were moved into solitary confinement, just as Albert Woodfox had been years before. One of them sent out a final message through his lawyer. If we disappear, tell them we only told the truth. The reporter, now under police protection, received calls from former guards who wanted to speak anonymously. One said, "You think we didn't see it? We all saw it. But when it's your job or your life, you shut up." Another sent an email with a single attachment, a photograph of an incident log with several names blocked out and one word written at the bottom, "Covered." By then, the story had become too big to bury. Civil rights groups, journalists, and families of prisoners joined forces. They demanded body cameras for guards, federal oversight, and access to medical records. For the first time, Louisiana officials faced a national hearing about Angola's treatment of inmates on death row. Reporters read from the diaries during the broadcast. Millions listened in silence as the words filled the room. "We are not asking for freedom. We are asking to be seen." Even hardened senators went quiet. The diary, once a hidden secret under a church floor, had become the voice of hundreds who never lived to tell their stories.
In the weeks that followed, several officers were suspended. The Department of Justice announced a federal review into Louisiana's prison system. It wasn't a complete victory. Many of the accused denied everything, and the families of the dead still had no closure. But for the first time in decades, the truth about Angola wasn't whispered. It was shouted on national TV. The reporter stood once more outside the gates of the prison as the sun went down. The fields looked calm, but she knew better. Change came slowly in places like this. Still, something had shifted. Somewhere inside, someone was still writing, still recording what others wanted to erase. Before she left, she placed one of the copied diary pages inside a clear folder and taped it to the chain-link fence. The wind pressed it flat, and under the fading light, the ink glowed faintly. It read, "They can bury our bodies, but not our words." For a long moment, the reporter stood there, watching the paper flutter, the sound of cicadas rising through the night. Behind her, headlights cut across the dirt road as another car approached the gate. Maybe another reporter, maybe another family looking for answers. And for the first time, the truth felt louder than the silence that had hidden it for so long. Angola's story isn't just about one man or one diary. It's about every voice that dared to speak in a place built to silence them. The words that escaped those walls changed how America saw its prisons and proved that no system, no matter how powerful, can bury the truth forever.